Welcome to Cybersecurity Today, the Week in Review. I'm your host, Jim Love. Once again, I'm going to change things up and bring in my panel early. Terry Cutler, CEO of Cyology Labs. Terry, you're out there from Montreal. Good. And David Shipley from Beauceron Security in Fredericton. Welcome.
Good to see you again.
The news this week, it's another bombshell, another global outage affecting Microsoft. But two other stories caught my attention because Microsoft, believe it or not, was not everything that happened. And I want to talk about those. I'm just going to introduce them one at a time and we'll go into them. So one that struck me coming out of the US was a ransomware attack against the blood donation nonprofit OneBlood. The news said it significantly reduced its ability to take, test, and distribute blood. And it affected 250 hospitals in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, reputedly the Culin Group. And then the Canadian government opened an investigation into Ticketmaster. So there's a couple stories I want to talk about. So let's start out with OneBlood. This OneBlood has really drawn a straight line between life and death with a hack. I mean, as horrible as it is, if you're a cancer patient or someone who needs life-saving surgery like a bypass, delays are horrible. But when you shut down blood, you not only delay so-called elective surgery and change a schedule, you shut down emergency surgery. And we don't have ambulance sirens up where I live. I don't live in a large city. But with the long weekend coming up, we see helicopters rushing to take accident victims to hospital where they need surgery. And you don't do that surgery without blood. Have we hit the breaking point now of hacks to our health infrastructure?
When it comes to healthcare, I keep wondering exactly what that breaking point needs to look like. I mean, let's rewind for a second and recap for listeners. This has been the worst year across all elements of healthcare that we have ever seen in history. We have the United Health Charge Healthcare billion-dollar cost to that business alone, let alone the multi-billion-dollar havoc to the US healthcare system. We have hacks against major pharmaceutical chains, notably London Drugs here in Canada, others in the United States. We have other services, particularly this service, but also mental health. And let's recap what some of these impacts are. Even the outage that happened 10 days ago with CrowdStrike brought down some 50,000 devices inside the British Columbia health sector, which equivalently was the same impact as a ransomware attack. What do we know about these attacks? When IT systems go down, when these services are unavailable, patient care is degraded. Wrong calls are made on diagnoses, on treatments, drug mix-ups happen, additional dosage happens with radiation and diagnostic imaging. Bad things happen that impact patient life outcomes consistently. So we are seeing people die in ambulatory and emergency care situations, and we're seeing people's lives short from these attacks. And yet, Jim, I don't think a damn thing is changing. I just don't see the massive lift required in Canada to invest in not just cybersecurity, because you can't tool your way out of this the way you can a bank, because you have this spectrum of patient care that if you over-rotate on security, and there was a fascinating study on this, you'll actually increase heart attack and negative outcomes in ERs because nurses aren't able to log in fast enough to get timely information. So you got to balance this. And I'm just not seeing the interest and investment in this area. In Canada, the narrative continues to be dominated about staffing or facilities and not about IT. In the United States, there's a glimmer of hope in tying Medicare payments and the speed of payments in crisis to security outcomes and hygiene. But here in Canada, not even on the radar.
Maybe I can give a little glimpse under the hood of what's happening often in healthcare. So we do a lot of audits on healthcare. We're dealing with environments that have 18,000 machines each. And we're seeing a constant theme happening here where employees are not happy, they're leaving. They come in, there's a new guy coming in, and he's totally unprepared, untrained. He's just learned on the job. They'll get requests from a vendor to install a new SQL server for a product. But in the requirements, it needs its own dedicated SQL server. It needs to have carte blanche on the network because we don't want restrict access to it. And they start installing these servers at random. Next, you know, they're up to 2,400 servers in one department. It gets astronomically out of control. And you can't mass patch these things because a lot of them are 24/7 operations. It requires change control. And if you want to say, okay, we're going to upgrade these servers to the latest patches this weekend. Somebody is going to throw a wrench in. Oh, I need these servers up. We're doing some type of operation. And now the whole project got pushed again for another month. But during that time, if there's a critical vulnerability that's exposed, the hackers have this window of time to exploit this thing. So if it's exposed, they're going to get hit. And a lot of times they're using so many different cybersecurity tools. And this is a big problem we're seeing right now, is that they need to start consolidating all these security tools to a minimum. We have some companies that have 27 tools and they're trying to piecemeal what's going on. We had a situation where it wasn't a ransomware, but it was a weird incident that happened on one machine and it was propagating across the network. So in order for us to really get a handle on things, we had to have 27 people on a Zoom call. So because the server department uses one piece of software, the desktop uses a different solution, and the network has a different solution. And everybody had to be on the call to try and piecemeal what just happened, and it still couldn't really get done. So
Yeah. And I would just say one thing, Jim. I think as I've been reflecting on this past year, I don't think we can drive the kind of change we need in the healthcare system without physicians being required to learn and understand about the importance of information technology and their ability to deliver patient care. And I'm starting to think that medical schools in this country and medical societies have a role to play in either continuing education or the initial education of physicians because they're not getting it. They will turn on IT teams in a heartbeat because my spouse works in healthcare. They're tired. They're stressed. The gratitude that existed in the early days of the pandemic no longer exists, and it's past the breaking point, particularly in Canada. But without understanding the context of these things, then the story that Terry has told will continue to pile on. And as we see government money, we have to spend smarter and we have to do change management and we have to have culture that values technology's ability to influence patient care and outcomes. And I don't think that exists yet.
But without advances in technology, the healthcare system melts down. And I don't know, I can't tell you when exactly, but it melts down. So without that technology, we're not going to be able to continue to give healthcare to people at any level that we expect.
here's a
I think
challenge for
that's
you,
fair.
Jim. We're still dealing with Windows XP, maybe because it controls the software to the doors, the door locks. And that stuff, XP does not work with the latest technology. It doesn't work very well, in fact.
And I'll add one thing, like we still have a healthcare system in this country, in Canada in particular, where donors, like we have this myth, and it is a myth of a universal healthcare in Canada. We have universal single payer. And then we've
Yeah.
got this healthcare delivery network that is subsidized by private donors, those hospital charitable foundations doing their lotteries around the country, buy the equipment. And then whether that's the equipment that the hospital actually needed or not is often debatable sometimes, but the long-term operationalization and sustain of those just get dumped on a system that's already broken. We need to retool and we need to revalue the hardworking information technology specialists who understand IT and healthcare together. And I'm telling you, they are undervalued and massively overworked.
I'll give you an
And
example, and this is not to pick on doctors, but let's pick on doctors for a second. A friend of mine knows a person, I think it's really reliable, who makes more than $400,000 a year reading X-rays. They're a doctor.
yeah,
I'm
so
sorry.
radiologists.
That could be automated. There- There's just no question, and nobody come back to me and tell me, oh, but the great experience of doctors. Crap. This can be automated. The stats are there, but we're not moving on that. We have huge technical debt. We're still using XP. Like, come on.
Yeah.
What's amazing.
Well, I will say this, a well-trained radiologist finding the smallest speck of cancer is worth every penny. I know I won't devalue that side, but I'm saying the architects who build the digital systems, the PAC system, the network, the thing that enables the radiologist to do their job is also worth more to that hospital than what they're being paid. That would be my argument.
But don't spend that money on a radiologist so they can look through routine stuff. If you've got that level of skill, and by the way, I'm not taking away that level of skill may well be worth that, may be worth more, but don't make them flip through paper or go through routine X-rays and all of that sort of stuff at those costs. But the sensitivity of the system that gets built around that to being susceptible to being shut down by a single hacker, that that's now a huge vulnerability as well.
Well, and remember, X-rays are no longer film. They're 100% digital. We don't even have the ability to go analog back because that's where all the vendors have gone. And if you take diagnostic imaging down, so X-ray, CT scans, MRI, the whole spectrum, which is trivial to do, uh, you're back 200 years in healthcare.
I'll actually add another point to you. We've seen, obviously, when you get hit with a ransomware attack and your databases get corrupted, you can't simply just run the decryptor tool and get it working. The tables get all messed up. So, which means if you've got thousands of x-rays to present the patients, there's a good chance they'll all be corrupted and won't be able to come back online in time, which means maybe the author will be redone again, or it'll get the appointment will get pushed months later. It could be a mess.
And the thing is, last thing I'll make on the medical point, and I have spent 18 years being amazed by my spouse as she's gone through her education, everything else. But we treat x-rays very casually in society in terms of, oh, well, let's get another x-ray. That's dosage, gang. If you've got someone who's really, really sick and needs a really complex series of scans or CT scans, and they have to get redone and redone, that's cumulative over lifespan. And I just don't think we get it.
And unless you guys want to come up, if you got a solution, I'm game for it. But I wasn't picking on doctors, but the fact that we're going to struggle to find and pay people who can do cybersecurity and technology in these institutions, and we don't have the proper protection, it is something that everybody needs to wake up and be concerned about.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, not just IT.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where patient care, thinking about patient care and the systems that power patient care. Like when you go into a surgery, they lay out all the tools. The tools were carefully prepared, packaged, and cleaned, prepared. The operating room was prepared, carefully cleaned and prepared. The technology is a core essential delivery part of that patient care and needs the same love and attention that all the other steps get and
Yeah.
respect.
I mean, you would never have a doctor who was totally unqualified because their experience was 30 years old. They hadn't done anything ever. I don't think you would let that doctor walk into an operating room and start doing surgery. But you could take a 30-year-old operating system that hasn't been and use that for healthcare. Speaking of, let's move on to more ineffective responses to technology. Speaking of the Canadian government, I just think people need to wake up the fact our government is totally nowhere in terms of being able to deal with cybersecurity. They're going to do an investigation into Ticketmaster. And I would normally say, who cares? The Canadian government, what do? They sanction a firm. We've lost so much respect over the years as a market. We get everything last now. Google and Facebook just thumb their noses at us. Government legislation, it just seems to drift. Do you think that this Ticketmaster thing is going to take some life?
I think it's because there's so many users in this database that it's going to cause so much financial fraud. There's already started having phishing emails coming out. The goal of this is strictly monetary. The hackers just want money from you. So they're going to be in there sending phishing emails, reset your password, log back in, but you're really giving all the credentials to the scammer. And a lot of people use the same password online. And they're going to use that information to log into maybe your bank account or whatever you don't have two-step verification turned on with. And they're going to get access to it and extort you even further.
I think the part that gets me so frustrated, Jim, is we've got legislation that is stuck in the frozen January day molasses speed of Parliament, and we are screwing around on the edges. We could easily get Bill C-27, the revamp of our privacy laws, so they actually have some teeth. True, if we deep six the artificial intelligence composition that got bolted on that no one likes and no one agrees with, it's not ready for prime time, and actually pass this. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have each province have this hodgepodge of privacy regulations. And does Ticketmaster care a whit about Quebec's privacy commissioner or Alberta's? No, they don't care. We need to deal with this as a country. And this comes down to issues of national sovereignty in the 21st century. What does that actually mean if a big tech company can, as Terry noted, thumb its nose at us, or, Jim, as you're pointing out, a Canadian pipeline was wide open on the internet, hacked by a Russian D-level Pee-wee hockey team crew of hackers, Zarya, and almost went boom. Okay, so maybe we can get back this fall and pass C26 and get the regulations out so that before 2030, we don't have a plant go boom.
Mhm.
That's what I would like Parliament to do its damn job and get it done. I used to point at the Americans and was, yes, look at them getting it done. They got regulations, they've got White House attention, and the Supreme Court. Everyone thinks the Supreme Court is just nuking things left, right, and center on social, political, cultural issues in the US. No, now we've got regulations thrown out the window with Chevron. So all of those good things that we saw coming out of the US to actually deal with the mess, they've rolled back the water plant cyber safety regulations are now deemed unconstitutional because Congress hasn't passed specific laws specifically
Oh, yeah.
giving the powers. The US Congress is now going to have to get more literate than regulators on issues that change on a monthly basis. And here in Canada, we aren't even showing up to play ball.
I think the problem you're also seeing is that there's no one size fits all. So if you put regulation down where you need to have a penetration test done once per year, you need to have all these controls in place. When you're looking at small, medium-sized businesses, a lot of times they don't have the time, money, or resources to deal with this stuff. They're forced to get a penetration test, but these tests could be 10, 20, 30, $40,000 a year for one test. So now they don't have the budget for it. I don't have the resources for it. What do I do? So there's going to be a time where it's not going to be feasible for everybody for sure.
No, and I think, what Canada needed, and we've screwed this up so badly, and I got to own this from New Brunswick's perspective. When we had Cyber NB, we had this cool little idea to bring in the cyber essentials from the UK and try and promote that as a basic standard of cyber hygiene, a kind of digital fire code, as it were. And it got overly complicated way too quickly in Canada. Now we got this off in the winds, kind of partially abandoned national cyber certification that's halfway between the original intent of Cyber Essentials and ISO, for example. What we need small and medium sized businesses, what would be transformational for the fire code? Because we didn't start with the fire code we had today when we had our very first fire code. It'd be nice. Mandatory MFA, mandatory tools to prevent password reuse, security awareness education. Like start with 3 simple wins. And every small business that's it. We're talking $1,000 out. Trust me, if you spend more on coffee for your staff than cybersecurity, you're going to get out. So let's start with a coffee budget size ask for small, mid-sized business. Raise the cost of cybercrime. They can't even get that conversation going. And trust me, it's not from lack of screaming from the rooftops in front of parliamentarians.
A lot of companies are still not spending over $1,000 a year in cybersecurity for small, medium, especially the smaller guys. We had a situation, we did an IR a couple of years ago. This was the craziest thing. This guy was so damn cheap. This guy went on torrent to download his antivirus solution. So he downloads it, installs it in his office. There's 5 employees. He installed it. And all of a sudden now, all his customers are receiving emails from, and it's an insurance company too. It's a small little brokerage firm. His clients are receiving emails saying, hey, Brenda, our renewals are coming up to date. Here's a copy of your quote. It's zipped, but here's the password to unlock it. So the people that are unlocking and opening the file are all getting infected. So this guy, we had to do an IR on this guy's company to find out that he was pirating antivirus solution because he didn't want to spend money on cybersecurity.
Yeah. I'll wrap this up though in one thing, because you brought it up with multi-factor authentication. How many of you have gotten Facebook friends who sent you a note saying, my account was hacked? Don't respond to my Facebook. Facebook has all the money in the world and they can spend it on all kinds of things and they can't implement multi-factor authentication themselves.
It's not that they can't. This is the classic Marissa Mayer Yahoo root cause of the single largest breach, by the way, still in history of like 3 billion plus records. The security team begged the executive team to turn multi-factor authentication on and said, no, it's going to cost us customer adoption.
Yep.
And so business choices have security costs and they don't care because that bill never comes due. And they still got their payday, albeit shaved a bit when Verizon bought them. But as long as you still get your payday by doing what's right for fiduciary responsibility, and that Venn diagram does not overlap with security all the time, then we're going to have this problem.
It's not about convenience.
It's got to be in balance. Speaking of balance or great disturbances in the insurance force, let me segue to the stories that are catching my attention. You've got Delta Airlines filing a potential $500 million lawsuit. Now, right now, they've lawyered up with one of the most aggressive law firms in this space you can get. They've saber rattled at Microsoft and at CrowdStrike. Knowing license agreements like I have seen them over the years, I'm not sure where this is going to land or fly because, like, most licensing agreements are basically, we owe you your money back, like, which is going to be nowhere near $500 million. So good luck with that. But it's literally like watching one of the classic Toho era Godzilla movies, right? We got Big Airline and we've got Mothra of Microsoft and we've got King Ghidorah with CrowdStrike just going at it. And all the rest of us peons are just sort of like getting trampled underneath. But the insurance industry as a whole is also in a deep discussion about the coverages. So people are hitting them up
Right.
for business interruption coverage, system disruption coverage, and the insurance. I will be surprised to see how this plays out. That this is, if as rumored, a $5.4 billion hit to the global economy. If that's the bill about to hit insurance, that's bigger than any single environmental disaster we've ever seen.
But
And this
more than
gets,
that amount of money,
yeah,
David, if they break the limitation of liability clause in license agreements, if somebody breaks through that, it is going to have an effect that will be catastrophic. Insurance rates are going to, if you can get coverage, you're going to go through the moon. The whole question of whether anybody even wants to be in this industry, if you have unlimited liability, is going to be big.
I think we're a decade away. I think there will be people who will study this in law school in future generations. And remember, breaking unlimited liability is something the Biden proposals, pre the Supreme Court throwing a grenade in regulations in the US, we're pushing for with in terms of getting rid of those software licensing terms. So we got two attacks now. We have an actual courtroom one that's going to advance through. If not, I mean, the best case scenario right now for all of us, honestly, is some kind of a settlement payout. This doesn't end up in a judgment because that's a no-win scenario for everybody. For Delta as a buyer, you are not going to like the price of goods that people are going to reprice and sell you to offset that risk.
I think there's going to be a change also where it's going to say, look, we're going to provide you software protection. You know, there's going to be a best effort piece in there. And
Yeah.
on top of it, if insurance companies are going to start charging you now for disruption, well, you got to prove that it was this software you just bought is the problem. But what if that software had conflicted? Let's take an example of CrowdStrike, for example. So let's say CrowdStrike pushed out an update, but so did Microsoft at the same time. And all of a sudden there was no coordination. And this has happened in the past when I used to work for Novell. Push out a patch, all of a sudden they conflict, things crash. Who's to blame? Oh, but you went out first. You didn't tell me about this. Now there's infighting behind the scenes. The insurance companies don't care. They're collecting their money and they're not going to pay out because you didn't justify who did it.
Well, and I'll add one thing to this very interesting dynamic related to insurance. It's got to be fun to see how this all plays out in terms of all these layers of complexity that you just mentioned. So your point about, we've got software defined networking, we've got operating systems, we got security systems. So anything that goes to trial is going to go through discovery. And
Yep.
so in that discovery process, Delta, by the way, better be hoping that there's not one of those internal engineer architecture emails saying, by the way, we are under investing in our disaster recovery processes and resilience and training budget and all those things. Because not that I'm offering legal advice, because I am not a lawyer, but if I'm CrowdStrike or Microsoft, I am 100% going for your throat on the other side about your resiliency practices and investments, because they weren't the only airline that used CrowdStrike that had an outage, but they were the only airline that had an outage that was this severe. And so what gets really interesting, again, the legal wrestling match, this is WrestleMania for cyber. Like, this is the big one where Hulk Hogan's ripping his shirt off. This is going to set precedent around process, around investment, around liability. Big.
That we raised here. They don't have to win this lawsuit. The insurance company may settle just so it doesn't have to go through discovery, because Delta may freak out and say, we've seen an example of this with Fox News, where they allowed the whole discovery to go on and then settled for billions of dollars. We've seen that movie. Nobody's going to go through that. again. So in effect, the limitation of liability clause might get broken by sue and settle. That's still going to have a huge impact on rates, on coverage, and all of those things that smaller companies need. If you're Delta, you've got resources. If you're a mid-sized company that's trying to get cyber insurance, you're going to get hit with rate increases that you've never seen before, or potentially no coverage.
Raises a key economic point that I'm trying to go back to the governance issue. So in the banking system, when the banking system failed spectacularly in 2008, the cost of that failure was not absorbed by the banking system. It was absorbed by society and our economies writ large. We all paid the price of that speculative gambling bubble in a fancy business suit. We are all collectively going to pay this $5.4 billion and have not a whit of say in setting up structures and conditions that will prevent the $10 billion one, the $20 billion one. This is a precursor. It is not the end of the chapter. It's the end of the beginning chapter of an entire book of pain that we're going to continue absorbing in society.
Maybe I can add something to that point. So, we often work sometimes with insurance companies, but we work a lot more, obviously, with small, medium-sized businesses who incorrectly fill out their forms that they have all this cybersecurity technology in place. Do you have a SOC? Are you monitoring your logs? Are you doing MFA? Do you have this? Yeah. I've got everything. And next, they get covered. But I'm like, you can't just fill that out. But yeah, I got covered. So if something happens, they're going to pay me. Like, no, they're not, because they're going to see that you lied on the form. You filled it out correctly. What we need to try and do is maybe work closer with the insurance companies to run an audit or a quick scan to see if they really have what they say they have in place. So this way you can actually insure them properly.
And Terry, I know of he's a character in the Canadian cybersecurity scene. A couple of years ago, he said in between gigs, he was hired by one of the major insurers and he was dropping in on mid-sized firms. And he would find check the boxware and he would fail them. And not only did the cyber insurance coverage get yanked that day, all of their insurance coverage, their D&O, their business liability, all of it was gone that day.
Crazy.
So the bill for fibbing on those assessments.
Just call me a crazy fool, but maybe the insurance company should be also helping people remediate these risks instead of just hoping that they can cut off the coverage. Just a thought.
So I asked that question and they said, well, customers don't want to pay to get an audit done on their networks because they'd rather just pay the coverage and that's it.
And remember, basically, insurance is amortizing the consequences, right? So we all pay our premiums, a bunch of reasons, and we're all paying.
I get it. There are insurance companies out there saying, hey, if you put this limiter on your car so you can't speed, or if you do these sorts of things, I'll reduce your rates. Maybe there's a competitive place that somebody could be in the market that says, if you put these things in place, we'll help you with coverage. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think the data still is missing on the actuarial side to actually trace specific actions to specific points of risk on cyber. We've got these tables now for 60, 70 years on cars. Teenage boy, red sports car equals bad thing. Got it. We don't have that in cyber.
Oh, yeah. Well, and we've managed to find a whole lot of stuff to talk about. And talk about the elephant in the room. What about the new Microsoft Global Service Interruption? By the way, we got a tip on it from an anonymous CISO. We love you guys. Just when I'm recording the podcast, not just after I've recorded it, so I can get your news. But this whole reputational piece of Microsoft, the whole idea of, and can you imagine having to make this announcement the day you go to Wall Street with your earnings announcements? It was a tough day for Microsoft. What's your take on this story?
Well, first, mad props to Kevin Beaumont, Gossie the dog on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And, this is not the first time they've had an Azure level DDoS attack, but it's the first time they've had to own it. What was interesting to me was not only that DDoSes are back in a big way. I mean, this had to be sizable to take down Microsoft. And I start to feel a little bit like New Orleans pre-Katrina with our digital dikes all around this semi-submerged geography of the internet going, I think we're in trouble here. These waves keep getting higher. I think one day this is going to catch up to us in a storm and it's really, really going to hurt. It was also the DDoS mitigation that made the outage as bad as it was, which I
Really?
hadn't
What?
realized in Microsoft's post-incident review posting. They talked about there was an uptick in traffic, which was later determined to be a DDoS. Mitigation steps were put in place according to their playbook. Then they realized that they were still having ongoing issues, and they did another mitigation, and they realized that they needed to undo the first thing that they had done because it was actually amplifying and making the situation. And so that is an interesting sort of twist. I've lived through DDoS attacks when I was the lead for the cybersecurity team at the University of Brunswick. We had a kid get in a fight with two kids from the GTA and one Midwest US over Call of Duty. They got themselves a 50,000 machine botnet on the cheap, rented it from the Russians, and they pummeled our poor little firewall, a Juniper firewall at the time, into the Stone Age, working through that right in the middle of reading week at a university. Hats off to Microsoft and the engineers there. They're trying to keep Azure running on a day-to-day basis, let alone when someone throws this wave at them. But yeah, mistakes happen.
2 weeks ago, I would have said DDoS, those CrowdStrike. And and then I realized what I just said in there. Terry, I cut you off. You were going to
Well, I think, going back to an earlier point that David mentioned about legislation, I think in order to combat cybercrime and these DDoS types of attacks, government needs to work closer with the telecom companies, because the telecom companies can see what's happening on the internet and they can see where these attacks are coming in from at a closer base. But in order for you to investigate this, there's got to be subpoenas, there's going to be all kinds of stuff. And you have to know the IP address you're getting, but you're not looking at it as a global picture of the other IPs that are linked with this IP attack. So there needs to be closer collaboration with the telecom firms, because they can see the unknown unknowns. They can see where these attacks are coming in from, and even properly, they might be able to attribute where these attacks are really originating from.
But this also, like, a broader issue here is, like, we look at these botnets. They are IoT devices that were either had hard-coded credentials or easily patchable, fixable vulnerabilities that were fire and forget bought from Amazon, third-party sellers, you name it, no consequences. Like, basically, the digital equivalent of lead paint products back in the day, but shipped out into the digital environment today to kind of paint that analogy, environmentally poisonous and bad for our cyber health, and ship it and forget it, dumped into the marketplace. But also the routers many telecommunications providers provide not getting patched in a timely fashion because efficiency, outage, customer satisfaction, et cetera, which is hard. Absolutely. But these botnets are the zombie armies, right? This is 250,000 devices. There are billions, is it 50 billion IoT devices out there? And unless we start from secure by design and safe for internet for lifespan kind of approaches, which imposes costs and slows things down, which requires regulation, these botnets are going to keep getting bigger.
And it's changing too fast to keep up. That's the other challenge too.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many parallels in the physical world that, just to wrap up my thoughts and where things are at, when it comes to hospital hygiene, all the work that had to go into doing proper hygiene to prevent infectious diseases from killing people in operating rooms. And yet we still also have MRSA and other hospital-borne infections. So we still have problems. And the environmental lessons and the engineering lessons from climate change and environmental disasters, natural disasters, they all apply online. But to Terry's point, they're happening light speed. And we're just not equipped. And the consequences are compounding.
I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, though, David, and I think it's important if you're in cybersecurity. Remember what you said about hospital diseases, that a lot of them could be cured by washing your hands.
Yep.
The thing I want to leave everybody is, yes, we talked about, we're at a pivot point in technology right now. We're at a point where technology has become our infrastructure, where we are totally dependent on it. And people, especially governments, have to up their game. And that's just reality. They're responsible for providing infrastructure, be it highways, be it hospitals, and now networks. And they have to step up to that. But don't stop washing your hands. Multi-factor authentication. You guys know it better than I do. The things that you need to do, the basics. Don't stop doing the basics.
That's your stuff. Multi-factor authentication. And if you're stealing your antivirus, God help you.
We know the challenges we've been talking about. We've been talking about that for the last 20 years. So ever since I started my ethical hacking career in 2005, we've been talking about the exact same thing all the time. a lot of companies still don't implement 50% of what we're telling them to do because it hinders production or it affects productivity or whatever it is. 50% of the stuff we're recommending doesn't even go into production.
But if you buy no other licensed software out there, make sure your endpoint protection is the one licensed piece of software you get.
Yes, EDR for sure.
Please,
I'm going to wrap it on that, guys. This has been fabulous, and hopefully we've left everybody at least a smile. I think Terry, you gave us at least that for the long weekend. My guests today have been Terry Cutler of Cyology Labs and David Shipley of Beauceron Security. Terry, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
David, wonderful to have you back, our entertainment critic and security expert.
Thank you so much.
I'm your host, Jim Love. I'll be back with the cybersecurity news on Wednesday morning because it is a long weekend. I hope you'll join us on Wednesday. But until then, have a fantastic holiday weekend.